What out, chaps? How's it going? You know, there's an old saying, beware Greeks bearing gifts. Virgil wrote that back in the day when the Greeks were twatting everyone, and I think that's why I've got a soft spot for the Greeks. Odysseus and the Iliad, the Odyssey, they're the great stories, and Greece is a fantastic civilization that was, you know, we like to think the Brits invented democracy. It was the fucking Greeks, really. Everyone uses our current parliamentary system, but the real pioneers of this stuff were the Greeks. And if anyone's never read the David Gemmell's Troy trilogy, I heartily recommend that. It's just fantastic stories. So it grips my shit when people talk shit about the Greeks over this European debt crisis. Now, I'm not saying there aren't fucking gay hairdressers retiring when they're 49 years old in Greece. There are. But they're certainly not a lazy, foolish, feckless people. And they don't deserve any of the shit they get. It's obviously far more complicated than it's made out to be. And the reason I'm talking about it today is because of this fucking drivel. I read this story today on ABC News. Says that mass testing at empty ICUs, Germany scores early against the virus. How has Germany kept deaths from the new coronavirus low compared to other European nations? Well, I'll tell you fucking why. And it's not for any of the reasons that these fuckers will tell you. If anyone isn't aware of just how bad the statistics are elsewhere, here's the stats for all total coronavirus cases so far. We've nearly hit 1 million for the world at large. The USA's flew up to 212,000, Italy's at 110, Spain's at 104, China's at 81, and Germany's at 77. First of all, I don't think I need to make another separate video about why China's got it under control, because that's common sense to anyone that isn't a complete lemon. China's got it under control because China is a despicable authoritarian regime, and they fucking welded people in their apartments. Like, the things that China can get away with when it comes to fighting a pandemic are things that no Western country would ever be able to get away with or want to get away with. So completely disabuse yourself of the notion that we can get anywhere near the Chinese when it comes to fighting a pandemic, because we don't and we wouldn't want to. It's a price that no self-respecting Westerner was willing to make. I'm not happy to see fucking people get welded into their apartment buildings like the Chinese were doing. Yeah, you can find it if you want. There's literal pictures people have took on the phones where they're inside their apartment building. They've got like an outward leaning exit to get out of the fucking place. And the Chinese government have literally welded bars over the fucking thing. Like, of course they've managed to get a grip of it. There's a bloke keeping watch at a fenced-in complex as well. They do shit that we couldn't even dream of. So of course they can control a virus. Which is why it's all the more baffling why you've got people praising the Chinese. Like, these are the people who put 1 million Uyghurs in death camps, sell people's organs, use child slaves, fucking the most immoral shit you can think of. And you've got weirdos in the US and the UK and in Europe praising them, going, oh, look how good they are at handling a fucking pandemic. Yes, they are good at handling a pandemic because they are fucking awful. That's why. Of course we can't match them. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about China. So Germany, despite having 77,000 cases, has only got 931 deaths, which by comparison is astounding. They've got nearly 22,000 more cases than France, but they've got a fraction of the deaths. A fraction. No one compares to them. If you just look at the top 10, the Italians have lost nearly 14,000 people. The Spaniards have lost 10,000. Chinese, 3,500. The USA, nearly 5,000. Germany, 930. It's fucking minuscule by comparison. And these twats want to make out like it's purely down to the fact that they're well organised and efficient. Fucking bullshit. Money talks and bullshit walks. And the best way to save lives during a pandemic is to have resources, to buy ventilators, to buy hospital beds, to buy drugs, to pay medical personnel. That's why Germany's keeping everybody alive. And those of us that are in the know have knew this for a decade. Remember this guy? Yanis Varoufakis is an economic wizard and a fucking genius. And he's been telling anyone that wants to listen exactly why he knocked back the bailouts, because it was a pretense to give the Germans a shit ton of money. I'll let him tell you the story.
I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! Nermeen Sheikh is in New York with our guest, Yanis Varoufakis, the finance minister of Greece, who resigned over austerity. Nermeen?
I want to turn to Michael Fuchs, a senior member of German Chancellor Angela Merkel's CDU party. He was asked in February 2015 why the majority of Germans were opposed to giving money to Greece.
Well, it's a little bit the Greek government, and particularly Mr. Varoufakis, who came up with some wordings which were not really, in a way, somebody who is, well, who is in a demand, is in need of money, and he should not handle our finance minister, neither our chancellor, like he did. So it was quite insulting our people, and that's one of the reasons the Germans are pretty upset about the situation.
That was a member of Angela Merkel's CDU party. So, Yanis Varoufakis, could you comment on what he said about your negotiating style and its impact on how the Germans saw the Greece debt crisis?
Well, by the way, there's no such thing as the Germans. You go to Germany, you get a variety of opinion. We began our Democracy in Europe movement with our comrades in Germany. Everywhere we go in Germany, we have immense support as a pan-European democratic movement. It is the German government that saw me as a major, major inconvenience. And you know what? They were very right to see me as a major inconvenience. And you know why I was extremely inconvenient? Because I didn't want any money. We had the largest loan in human history. The question is, what happened to that money? It wasn't the money. It wasn't money for Greece. It was money for the banks. And the Greek people took on the largest loan in human history on behalf of German and French bankers under conditions that guaranteed that their income, our income in Greece, would shrink by 1/3. That is grapes of wrath, John Steinbeck material. 1/3 of national income disappeared. So it was impossible to repay that money. And they knew that in the first place. So the only reason why they effected this so-called bailout for Greece was to save their own banks and to present this as solidarity with Greece. And my simple line was this: we're not going to take another euro from the German taxpayers, from the hardworking people of Germany, of Slovakia, of France, until and unless we've stabilized our economy. And, let me put it this way. The German Schwabian housewife, the Protestant ethic, what does it recommend? That if you're bankrupt, you should not borrow more money, right? So this is what I said. This is why I was extremely inconvenient, because I was utilizing the ethos and the morality of the Protestant ethic of the spirit of capitalism, according to Weber, and to the German traditions. And they couldn't believe it, that here was a Greek finance minister who was not asking for more loans.
91% of the bailout went to German and French banks?
Yes. Well, the first bailout. The second bailout, 100%. And the third bailout, which I didn't sign, Amy, it was 85 billion. Of that, precisely 0 will go to Greece. So these are just typical extend and pretend loans. What happened was very simple. In 2010, the Greek state went bankrupt because it was part of a common currency area, a monetary union, that was simply not fit to the purpose of sustaining the great financial collapse of Wall Street, the City of London, the Frankfurt banks, the French banks, and the Greek banks, and so on and so forth. So there was a cynical transfer of private sector, private bank losses onto the shoulders of the weakest of taxpayers, the Greeks, knowing that those shoulders were weak, so weak that they wouldn't be able to sustain that burden, and that burden would then be transferred to the shoulders of the German, the Slovak, the French taxpayers. And once they did this, it's like Shakespeare, it's like Macbeth. You commit one crime, then you have to commit a second crime to hide the fact that you committed the first one, and then a third one, and then the fourth one. And the second crime, of course, was a second bailout, because once the first bailout makes whole the bankers, Then within a few months it becomes abundantly clear that the Greek state cannot sustain that loan. So a second predatory loan is enforced upon the Greek government in order to pretend that it is making its payments for the first loan, and then a third one, and then a fourth one. And the worst aspect of it is that these loans, which were not loans to Greece, were extended on condition of stringent austerity that shrunk our incomes. So we entered a debt deflationary cycle, a Great Depression, with no end in sight.
So, what's the takeaway from that? Don't lend money to people that are already drowning in debt and bankrupt. Common sense. Just how well did the Germans do out of it? The big bailouts after the financial crash? Well, I can show you that. Yes, the moral of the story is never lend money to someone that's gone bankrupt. Everyone who doesn't spend like a drunk sailor on shore leave in Las fucking Vegas knows this. Yanis Varoufakis knows this, and everyone who's ever managed a bank account knows this. Don't just take his word for it though, or mine. The internet is replete with evidence. Here's one from the Local, that's Germany's newspaper in English. It says, Germany made billions on Greece's debt, Berlin confirms. 21st of June 2018. Berlin has been one of the main lenders to Greece during its debt crisis. While Conservative parties warned the support in Greece would come at the cost of the German taxpayer, new figures show Germany has made money on the crisis. The German government released figures on Thursday in response to parliamentary questions from the Green Party, which show that Germany has made €2.9 billion in interest payments on Greek bonds. That's just interest payments. And that's just one thing, that's interest. As he pointed out, 95% of the first bailout and 100% of the second one went entirely to German and French banks. And it's always "and French" in parentheses because the French don't get as much as the Germans. It's like it's always been said that the French were convinced into getting into the EU because they think they're equal partners to the Germans. They aren't. The EU benefits Germany. I've said this before, we could all be buying cheap as fuck solar panels from China, but the Germans make them. So they put massive tariff on Chinese solar panels to make them equally expensive. So we buy them from the Germans. The system is rigged to benefit one country more than any other. And that's why their economy is fucking booming. And the French and the Italians and the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Greeks are fucked. Here's another one from Reuters. Analysis, what taxpayer bailouts? Euro crisis saves Germany money. Of course it does. Throughout the crisis, Northern European leaders have said they will not stand for taxpayers having to fork out for other countries' problems. But despite 3.5 years of debt and banking turmoil, with bailouts totaling more than €400 billion, Northern Eurozone taxpayers have not lost a cent. What's more, governments in Germany, Finland, Austria, the Netherlands and France have saved billions of euros thanks to a sharp fall in how much they pay to raise money. German officials are well aware of their stronger financing position and the result of a more than 2 percentage point fall in borrowing costs, even as politicians continue to lament the risks. There is no fucking risk. It says the German federal budget saved €8.6 billion in 2011 due to low ECB interest rates. To be fair to the French, they know it as well, because Eurosceptic as fucking France, they're more Eurosceptic than we are. This was known ages ago. I cannot for the life of me find the video now, I'm assuming they deleted it, but I remember seeing a French minister talking about this, and they said, of course we know that people want to leave the European Union, but we can't allow them to. And the reporter was like, well, don't you think that's a bit authoritarian? And they're like, no, it's not authoritarian. We just need to make sure they ask the right questions. Quite how she said it with a fucking straight face is beyond me. But, you know, the French know the crack. They're not fucking stupid. And what do you think is the proof in the pudding of all these fucking numerous stories and numerous experts telling us for fucking ages that the Germans are fleecing everybody and dominating the entire eurozone with their economy because the whole system is rigged? Well, there's your proof right there. Because when Germany gets 77,981 coronavirus victims, they lose less than 1,000 people. But when Spain or Italy get something like a comparable number, tens of thousands of them die. If you think those statistics there are purely down to fucking mass testing and being nice and organised, You seriously need to take your fucking head for a shit. It's not a small, trivial number. It's a fucking colossal one. And they've got more ventilators and more beds and more doctors and more nurses and more infrastructure because they've got more fucking money. And they've got more money because they rob everybody else in Europe. The system's fucking rigged. It purely benefits the Germans. And as he said there, 100% of the second bailout went entirely to German banks. And they say the coronavirus is testing the alliances of people in in the EU. As well it fucking should. Because those numbers there are fucking damning. If you're Italian or Spanish, what do you think, seeing them numbers? Do you think, oh man, I wish we were as well organised as the Germans? Or do you think, hang on a sec, something's fucking amiss? I'm just glad we're out. And as for ours, yeah, it's not the worst, it's not the best. But the NHS would be doing a lot better if we hadn't had 6 million plus immigrants moving to the UK in the last 10 years. That's 6 million extra people to look after. If we'd have had a common sense approach to migration the whole time, there'd be a few million less people in the UK and that'd free up a few 100,000 more fucking beds. And that's another fact that the left don't want to fucking admit to. Again, you can say what you like, you can have opinions on what you want, but you've got cold, hard data to look at there. How much of a percentage of the bailout money went to the Germans? 100%. What's the best thing you need? What's the most important thing to saving lives? Infrastructure, ventilators, medical professionals. What do you need for those things? Money. That's the fucking reason. Mass testing. Do me a fucking favour. So that's that. I don't know why it hasn't annoyed more people. I don't know why the fucking mainstream media haven't pointed that obvious fact out. But hopefully my man Yanis will start speaking up. He's a regular on YouTube and he's a fucking clever bloke. But if I was him, I'd be making that case straight away. The Italians and the Spanish have been left to fucking rot. And the French are skint. Their economy's even shitter than ours. Because there's one fucking country that entire eurozone project's there to benefit. And as usual, it's the fucking Jerrys. They just can't help themselves. They love power more than a fat child likes Ben and Jerry's. Anyway, that's that. Let me know what you think. If you're convinced somehow that it's a inane conspiracy theory and you can crunch the numbers better than I can, fucking hell, I'm all ears. You prove me and Yanis wrong. If you can. Cheers.